Morning, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
No, not at all. It's a world that I have a close interest in. I've got a 3.5-year-old who does 3 days a week or 2.5 days a week, and I've got twins that are going to start in June as well, so I know all too well how much all this can cost. What about you guys as, nursery providers, operators? If the Chancellor were to start extending free childcare in the budget in a couple of weeks' time, I'm guessing you'd probably want to make sure it was done correctly.
Yes, definitely. I mean, obviously, it would be great for parents and really support economic output increase in those hours. But unless the government intend to actually pay for the free hours at the rate, the service costs, then it's just not going to work. Rather than creating more spaces, it will likely reduce capacity as more providers have to close their doors or at least restrict the number of free places they offer.
Yeah, is that concern that you have at the moment about the 15 and 30 hours of free childcare that is provided by the government? They don't pay you the going rate for it?
No, they don't, and they know about it as well. There was a Freedom of Information request done in 2021, which showed that the government knowingly underfunded those free hours by paying only 2/3 of what they thought it would cost to provide the hours. And they actually intended that private paying parents pick up the rest of the bill. So, we're being totally squeezed here, and that's why more than 5,500 providers have closed their doors over the last year because there's a giant hole in the accounts with what we're expected to deliver.
And I don't know if you have first-hand experience of what that means for parents, or I guess what that means for your nurseries. If childcare providers are going out of business, do you see that reflected on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, we do, and we're supporting parents where we can. We're in a good position in the sense that we're a B Corp, and providing social value and being inclusive is one of our is really embedded in our ethos. If we weren't that, over a third of our settings are just not viable to be run independently. We're using the fact that we have settings in more affluent areas to effectively subsidise the funded hours in the settings, that wouldn't be able to afford to stay open if we weren't doing that.
Right.
But we are seeing, those settings that are in areas where they don't have many private fee-paying parents to pick up the tab. Funding is their only income, and therefore they're having to close. And that obviously has a huge impact on the parents and then stems all the economic output the government are trying to increase.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about this, and we haven't even touched on those three troublesome words, cost of living, yet, have we? All that is impacting on you guys as much as it is every other business. You've got to keep the places warm. You can have toddlers and young children coming into cold settings. You provide them with food, which is going up at 15% a year at the moment. All those sorts of things are presumably coming to bite you as well. And if you don't pass those costs directly onto parents, then it's eating into your profits.
Yeah, I would say what profits, but what I've been trying to get across, politically, is that April this year is our absolute crunch point. For years we've been faced with the national minimum wage increases and the living wage increases, which is fantastic for our workforce. They deserve it. But the compounding effects of that, combined with the higher business rates, the energy, the food you just mentioned, we just can't afford it. And in April, the funding that we get to support this free childcare offer, is going up between 3% and 5%. We, compare that to inflation. We really can't put too much more on our private parents because they're already stretched so thin. And so we're being squeezed so much that, come April, there will be so many more closures across the sector because they just won't be able to stay open.
Ratios, let's talk about that just finally. There is this, there's a law, isn't it, about the number of adults that you need per child, and it changes depending on how old the child that the adults are looking after is. I think I'm right in saying that the ratios are greater in Scotland. An adult can look after more children in Scotland than they can in England at the moment. If there was some relaxation on that would presumably help you, wouldn't it? Because that would mean that you could employ fewer people for more children.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it would help us, and to be honest, there isn't a capacity. And for a sector that works so hard as it does, I really think it's a kick in the teeth to suggest that we should just work harder. It also doesn't suggest that having quality care and education is the primary concern for these policymakers. And, for us and for everyone, it wouldn't work in practice if it's just done in silo, which is what they're suggesting, because we're not only regulated on the number of practitioners to children, but we're also regulated on floor space. So, all of our nurseries are literally mapped out to the specific dimensions that we've been set per child, per age group. And just because they want to then decide, okay, actually you can have more children per staff member, doesn't mean that the room we're in suddenly gets a bit bigger.
All right, well, look, Harriet, I imagine we may talk again in the aftermath of a fortnight's time, depending on what Jeremy Hunt has to say, but appreciate you coming on to speak to us this morning. Thanks so much.
Brilliant, thank you, Steve.
Harriet Pacey, Director of Tops Day Nurseries, there on BBC Radio Solent Dorset Breakfast Show. Your thoughts on what you've heard? If you're a parent with kids